just taking a proactive approach is such simple, basic math. We know that you save money by doing that, at the very least. So if you don't have any heart or soul, if you don't care about your employees, at least think about the bottom line of your company.
Hello, and welcome to Awake at the Wheel. So recently, companies like AT&T, Google, Delta Airlines have started to introduce therapy in the workplace. So oftentimes they'll have a dedicated therapist that works for the company, and employees can book an appointment and have a therapy session. Sounds pretty self-explanatory. I think this is an evolution of the EAP programs, employee assistance programs, where employees can call into a phone number and get some short-term care. So on the face of it, I think it sounds like a great idea. But of course, as a therapist, I'm really giving it some thought and thinking whether this is or is not in the best interests of employees and of employers. So I've got a number of thoughts on the pros and cons side. But initially, what are your first thoughts on this, Oren?
Years ago, I did some, let's say, work for an EAP before I became a psychologist. And I had some clients, and I'll be very careful, but let's just say that with this EAP program, which seemed good, and I know it started off with addictions, and then it spread out to all these other factors, it seemed like a panacea almost, or they were claiming it was. So you have problems at work, come speak to a specialist, they can help guide you, et cetera, and make you more productive and mentally healthy. The problem is one of my clients had a horrific background. And again, I can't go into detail. Let's just say he required a lot of therapy. And I was able to wrangle 10 sessions out of this program. Usually they gave 3 to 5 sessions, and then the client's on their own. That's the issue. So the person thinks, oh, I'm going to get help finally. They start opening up. And then they realize, oh, it's limited. It's really limited. And also the people who are working for these EAPs, not to malign any of them, but many of them don't have the training. And so with this person, I begged, I said, look, 5 sessions is not enough. I got him 10, and they said that's like more than anyone's ever received. And I said, well, I can't help him with 10. I can try my best, but don't expect him to be, and he had some issues. Again, I have to be very careful. But let's just say that they were really concerned about this health and well-being and safety of not just him, but his colleagues. So that was just one of my, that's one of many examples I could say. But the point is, it's touted as something great. People put their hope in it. And unfortunately, it doesn't really deliver the way it's supposed to.
Yeah. So a couple of things come to mind right off the bat with that. And I think this is the case not only with the APs, but with insurance companies in general, is that there seems to be this gross misconception that there's a magic number of sessions. Right. I would say, and I think, tell me if you agree or disagree, 10 is like a bare minimum, because depending on the person's history, like you said, there's layers upon layers upon layers before we can even get to the current issue. And that's not just therapists trying to bill more. It's the reality of therapy is that it's not, let's snap our fingers in 3 to 5 sessions, they're quote unquote fixed. So insurance companies are guilty of that too, saying that their clients only receive a very limited number of sessions or funding. And I think too, and I've heard this actually from clients of ours who initially accessed their EAP program, that it feels like it's more for the company to look good than to actually help employees. And that's so sad, because I think that these EAPs certainly have potential. But again, with the limited nature of it, I can see that it's more of a checkbox or more of a value add that they can advertise to potential employees.
And it's liability for the company. They are worried about, if something goes wrong, they say, well, we addressed it. It's not our fault that this person ended up snapping or hurting somebody or, hurting themselves, having a mental breakdown. So it is all about liability. And people have to understand that even like evidence-based therapies, all these different types of, empirically supported treatments and so on, they were encouraged by the insurance company. Now, you and I, we talk about evidence-based therapy. We agree that it's a good thing, but you have to also understand how the sausage is made. And they were promoted by the insurance companies in the States, And basically what they wanted was something short term. Show us that on paper, we can say 8 to 10 sessions, that's good enough, and the person should be doing better after that. Therefore, our liability is minimized. We've done our part, and if the person is not able to get back on their feet after this period of time, then either they have to pay out of pocket, which is very expensive. And again, think about that. If someone's having struggles and the company has said, we're going to take care of you, we're going to help you, the person opens up, they trust the other person, they open up some deep wounds perhaps. And then they're told, well, sorry, you still have to, again, pay out of pocket thousands and thousands of dollars, or you're not going to be able to come back to work, or there's all these other problems that can occur. So again, as we've said many times, good intentions executed poorly lead to terrible outcomes. In this case, I don't know if the intentions were that good. The intentions truly were to get people back on their feet, getting them productive, reducing liability for companies or whoever's insuring them, or who's in charge, who's somehow responsible for them. Do it as quickly and cheaply as possible. That was the mantra.
So let's then assume, for argument's sake here, that some of these companies, again, like Google, Delta, AT&T, they're like, okay, well, fine, the EAPs aren't sufficient, aren't cutting it. Let's hire someone on and they can be in the office and available to our employees. Sounds like a lovely idea. And of course, the cynic in me will think very briefly about this and see a myriad of problems. So what comes to mind is an example of some of the police services, and I obviously won't get specific here, but I'm aware of some of them who had this same idea, where let's get a psychologist, who works for the service, works in the office. That way our officers can have quick access. To me, that's a huge red flag and a huge problem, because that psychologist works for the service. It's, in and of itself a conflict of interest, because although that psychologist does have their ethical obligations that they have to uphold as far as confidentiality and so on, there is a conflict there because they have the same employer. So, let's think of a neutral example here. If a police officer does bring something forward to the psychologist that is in direct conflict with the organization, what's that person supposed to do? Yes, there's confidentiality, but again, there's certainly some issues that can arise there. And I also feel, whether it's in a police service or otherwise, there's going to be a level of trust that just can't quite be broached when the psychologist, the therapist, or whomever is working directly for the company. Personally, I would feel suspicious.
Well, and we have to tell the clients that our client really is the company that's paying us. That's just the reality, and people have to understand that. So you say there is confidentiality to a degree, but the company has the right to those records. How can anyone really feel safe when they know that in the end, their employer can see everything that's said in therapy? That's a fact. And there are therapists who can stand up. They would say, no, I'm going to be judicious in my note taking. I'll make sure not to present in a way that can be used against the client, not to lie or anything, not to be unethical, but there are ways of phrasing things, right? And unfortunately, over the years, I think you and I agree that many in our professions maybe don't have the spine to stand up and say, look, in the end, even though you're paying me, this person in front of me, their best interest is paramount. I need to make sure. Again, we're not talking about breaking any rules, laws, or ethics, but the reality is that again, when you're, as I said, there's a conflict of interest. When the person paying for it, they have the right to those notes. And again, will the therapist remind the client before the client says something? If the therapist sees, oh, this person is about to say something that could get them in trouble, are they going to remind the client that, you know what, just to remind you, anything that you state, I cannot state unequivocally that it will be protected, right? Will they say that, or will they let the person speak and say, well, 3 months ago, I did tell them about confidentiality at the beginning, so I did my job. I've seen people do that. I've seen many of our colleagues, unfortunately, act in ways that I consider to be immoral. Maybe it's ethical, but it's certainly immoral because they don't use judgment to think about how is this going to impact the person in front of me.
And let's say then that there is somebody who is judicious and does say, hey, Mr. Client, just so you know, just a reminder, the client is the employer. That's not going to lend to good therapy either, right? So while I certainly agree that would be a better approach to remind the client, it's really going to interfere. So whichever way we look at it, I feel like there's certainly some real issues here in terms of getting into like real good therapy. I guess another like obvious thing that comes to mind here, because I'm remembering working in a large office setting. How do you maintain your own confidentiality about going to your appointment? Everybody knows that the therapist's office
Mhm.
is in room number whatever, and you're leaving for 45 to 50 minutes every Wednesday. It becomes pretty obvious. And I know that there is certainly something to be said about the stigma being removed from attending therapy appointments, of course. Um, but there's also a level of privacy. Even if I was going to the doctor's office, I would want some level of privacy that
Right.
I'm attending appointments. So I think that that's a problem that arises from this as well.
Exactly. And look, I mean, now we can take this as an opportunity just to sort of broaden the topic to this idea. I'm sorry, I'm going to harp on this a little bit, but the fact is, and I'll be very mindful in my words, but you and I have worked with many clients who have insurance coverage, and there's different types of insurance coverage. Some insurance is just like, hey, you know what, you need to see a therapist, go ahead, you can do this or that. That's great. But there's other types where and especially with the clinic, where it's like, okay, we expect you to get this person on his or her feet, right? And we want you to do as quickly as possible. And the reality is that many of these insurance companies, and I alluded to it earlier, but I'm going to say it again, they don't have the client's best interests at heart. They have the bottom line is what all they care about. And I'm going to tell you, and I don't think I'm speaking out of school here, and I think that I'm okay to say this. It's really well known, and anyone who's gone through it knows this, which is whichever insurance company or provider that you are going through, that process in of itself can actually be traumatizing, little t or even big T
Yeah.
traumatizing. And the person on the other end of the phone, they're just doing their job. And I've had to say this to so many people. And I say, it sounds so stupid. And I say, don't take this personally. And I say, which is so stupid because of course it's personal, because your livelihood, your well-being, your future is in this person's hand, this faceless person on the other end of the phone who's speaking to you so callously. They're just saying, well, no, blah, blah, blah. And they have their own experts. And I'm going on a bit of a rant here, but I think it's really important for
Yeah.
people to recognize that they have to understand, again, how the sausage is made, that these insurance companies have their own experts, psychologists, psychotherapists, doctors, and everyone who will basically, in almost every case, provide the answer that their employer wants, or the
Yeah.
insurance company, the person paying them, no matter how ridiculous it is. And then this poor person has to then go pay out of pocket, try to find another expert to say, no, look, here's the evidence. This person, cannot go to work, or their injury was due to work. It wasn't due to something they made up in their head or something, or pre-existing condition. And this person can go bankrupt. I've seen cases. It breaks my heart where
Yeah.
people have gone bankrupt, right? It tears apart families.
Yeah.
It ruins. And look, there are people who game the system. And I think anyone who games the system should be kicked out of the system. We know this happens, whether it's the clients or the professionals who have, destroyed the insurance system. They have, by being unethical and immoral. But most of these people are good, hardworking people. They want to get back to work. And when your identity is wrapped up in what you do, in having a job, in seeing the same people, in getting, feeling productive, and suddenly that's taken away from you because something happens at work, whether it's a physical or a psychological or interpersonal incident, and you cannot work either the way you used to or at all, that it destroys the person, or it can destroy the person mentally. Their identity is wrapped up in that. And once again, they're going through all of that, all the, the associated problems that go along with that. And then they have somebody on the other end who's just so cruel and
Yeah.
cold-hearted. And I'm not besmirching all people who are, in these jobs. I just want to put it out there that these things have to be taken into consideration. So what happens when all of that is in-house? It's for that company, right? I am really concerned about how much influence is a manager, a supervisor, a VP. How much influence are they going to have on the process?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And thank you for the rant, Oren, because that is a rant that I go on a, I don't know, weekly basis, I'm going to say, because it is just so infuriating to see that over and over and over again. And that's such a great point that you make, unfortunately, that I can definitely foresee that happening with, having therapists, psychologists, whatever in the workplace. They're just going to become an agent of the employer. And unfortunately, I can see it being much like what we're seeing with insurance companies. And I'll add something too. You mentioned that there are some bad apples out there. Sure. But having worked in the insurance industry, I don't remember the exact number, but it was such a small fraction of the actual clients who were getting into accidents and getting injured who were scammers. But the narrative that we were served was that, oh, well, we have to protect the poor defenseless insurance company, so suspect everybody. So I recall it was baked into our training that we suspect everyone. And it's just so wrong and terrible. And, now being on the other side of it, I see the result of that suspicion and that maltreatment of clients. It's terrible.
Yeah. So, again, like I said, good intentions, bad execution. So there are ways, I guess, that that could be implemented that would help mitigate these concerns. And look, anything that helps the client or the employee, the client, the individual, I'm all for. But I really do hope that whenever and however this system is implemented, that they really take into consideration the kind of issues that we're talking about. And again, that they prioritize the employee's well-being, not the company's, not the insurance company or whoever's paying for it, but the employee. And again, I'm not naive. I understand there have to be financial considerations. If someone says, look, I want to do psychoanalysis 5 days a week for the next 5 years, then have you pay for it. I can understand that the insurance company might go, okay, wait a second, let's look at some short-term therapy, right? I get all that, but there has to be flexibility and acknowledgement that these issues, as you say, 10 sessions, bare minimum. That's for like simple cognitive behavior therapy type of issues. But either the issue that the person went through is traumatic or whatever that requires more therapy, or that incident triggered something in the person that requires a lot more work, historical issues and whatever. And if someone says, well, that's not our responsibility, that's something the person brought with them to the company. Well, this person is giving you 40, 60, 80 hours a week of their time to you. Let's have a bit of reciprocity here.
Well, and not to mention the fact that oftentimes our past influences the way that we're interpreting what's happening in the present. So if something does happen in the workplace, we can't just ignore the fact that we have this past and this history that does influence what we're seeing and feeling and experiencing right now.
Right, exactly. And one thing I was just going to say, just kind of segueing somewhere else, which is I'm wondering how much of this is, and it might sound silly, is influenced by the TV show Billions. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it.
I'm not, no.
Okay. Well, there is I think she was a psychiatrist, Wendy, forget her last name, but she is an in-house therapist for this company, Axe Financial, and she's a coach. She's just because she wants to protect herself, so she acts as a coach rather than as a psychiatrist. That way, she has more leeway in what she's doing and so on. So, but anyway, but she's in-house, and if anyone watches this show, you can see how tricky that can be. I know it's just a dramatization and so on, but the fact is, it's people should take a look at that and see these torn loyalties. And it was almost cool. For some people, they were ashamed to go. Others, it's kind of like, hey, everyone, I'm going to see Wendy, and it became this thing. So, I'm not quite sure again if that influenced in any way, but the reality is, life is influenced by art and vice versa. So if people are seeing this program, they might have these very different understandings and have misconceptions about what therapy is supposed to be like and what it's going to bring for them and so on. So, maybe they're being sold on a false pretense.
Yeah. And I guess that brings up another potential definitely likely pitfall with this is if one therapist is working with all of these employees and there's conflict in the workplace, that's very difficult for the therapist to be able to maneuver and, remain objective. And of course, that's our job to do so, but that adds a complication and a layer of complication for the therapist as well.
Right. Yet on the other hand, if the therapist has good boundaries, if the therapist is really adept at working with systems, that could be a good thing where, whether it's private therapy or you have the therapist come in, speak with either 2 or 3 people or the whole team, help them out and so on. The problem is a lot of companies do this with these, they'll have like a seminar and they'll have someone come in and they'll have some catchy thing of the day. What hat are you? What color represents your work style? Blah, blah, blah. All right. And it's almost always the same principles, just rejigged to look like something new that someone was able to sell to some naive or ignorant company, right? And again, they have this, and it's supposed to somehow help. Now, once again, is it because the employers believe it's really helping, or are they trying to say, look, we know there were some concerns, we know there was some tension between certain people or groups or whatever, our productivity is low, and is there somebody in the system, like a manager, VP or whatever, who's just going for the cheapest, simplest, well, it's actually not that cheap, but anyway, they're going for what they think is the simplest, fastest route and saying, I addressed it, right? Because they want to tell their higher ups. The point I'm getting to is we have, in any of these kinds of situations, we really need to question the motives of the people involved. That's so important. We can't naively think it's just for the well-being of others, because I'm going to go with one more step here. I know you've had the same experience. We've had countless people who have had terrible things happen to them, whether it's in school, whether they work for the government, whether they have worked for a hospital, and they are told every day or every month or on Bell Let's Talk Day or something like that about we care about you, we want to help people, we blah blah blah, mental health and so on, and being good citizens and everything. They hear it, they buy into it. And then when it comes to actually receiving the services or getting a little bit of empathy or anything like that, they realize it's all just talk. And that can be devastating. I've had so many clients say, of all the places, I thought this would be the one, because they talk about it all the time. It's put on all the doors and all the walls and everything. So is having a therapist here just a way to be saying, hey, we did our part. We have these therapists. We're doing good. Or, is it really going to be, used to its fullest advantage? Because there can be advantage. I don't want to, crap all over this, because if done right, of course, it's good to have someone there who can help people when they, when they need the help.
Yeah, and I wish I knew the numbers, but I know that it's startlingly low as far as EAPs, companies that offer them. The actual usage of them is very, very low. So I sense that in part has to do with the level of trust, or not feeling the buy-in to it, and perhaps feeling like it is all just talk.
Right. And again, I keep saying this, I hate to sound too cynical, but there's a reality, which is in any of these kinds of programs, there's layer upon layer. There's the therapist and the client. That's a good one. That's the connection. That's the most important relationship. But then there's the bureaucrats. Then there's managers and people who say, oh, there's a certain amount of money allocated to this. Let's say $10 million to the healthcare. Well, how much of that is administrative? How have we now created a new position that allows someone to make more money or to elevate themselves at the cost of others? We have to be so careful about this, because if nothing else, again, we've seen this happen time and time again, whether it's the government, whether it's the healthcare system, whether it's private organization. There are so many people in charge of these types of operations who should not be in charge. They don't know what they're doing, or they do know what they're doing, and they're doing it for their own self-interest, not for the benefits of others.
Yeah. So I guess maybe some listeners are wondering, okay, well, that's great. We've crapped all over this idea. So what would actually be helpful? So I think that in theory, like you're saying, in theory, these are good ideas. But if they're executed properly, they can actually serve to help people, which is, I would hope, the intention. I think that as far as in-house therapists, I don't see it being a good idea. I think that, we've identified all the possible pitfalls with it, which to me outweigh the benefits. But I would say, having access to maybe near site, if not on site, dedicated therapists, or a company that, the employees can access regularly or unlimited, or whatever the case may be, in a similar fashion to having someone in-house. And I think having somebody near site rather than on site would mitigate some of those problems. And I think too, as far as people's private benefits, I think companies would serve their employees better by perhaps increasing the access they have to private insurance benefits, so they do have the freedom to access a therapist that is of their choosing and perhaps is the appropriate fit. Because that's something we didn't talk about either, is that what if the in-house therapist is a terrible fit? That's not going to be helpful either.
That is so important. Right. And we know that one of the most important factors is, if not the most important factor, is the therapist-client relationship. So exactly. And if it's a limited number and they don't fit with them, well, then that client's the problem, obviously, versus maybe the therapist isn't that great. Maybe they have a problem with men or women or whatever. So yes. And again, this we should say, I've seen over the last number of years, maybe it was because of COVID. I know COVID played a part, but maybe this was happening beforehand, which is more companies are increasing the benefits, at least in Ontario, I can say. So kudos to those companies. There should be more, but sometimes when I hear about the packages that they have, I go, wow, I am so happy for you. You can actually get some good treatment as opposed to 3 sessions or something like that. So there is more of a move. And the craziest thing is, this has been known, I don't know, 30, 40 years at least. We do know that for whatever dollar, how many dollars you invest in the client's well-being, whether it's preventative or when it's, when it happens shortly after the fact, if it's done properly, if you take care of the client's mental health, stress, etc., you save so much money later on, whether it's through litigation, whether it's through, decreased efficacy at work and so on, or effectiveness. Just taking a proactive approach is such simple, basic math. We know that you save money by doing that at the very least. So if you don't have any heart or soul, if you don't care about your employees, at least think about the bottom line of your company. Why wouldn't you do that? And again,
Absolutely.
do it right.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess, to summarize our points here is it is a great idea to ensure that employees and people in general have access to mental health care. But there's better, more effective, more likely to be utilized ways to do it than these in-house therapists, in our opinion here.
Right.
But listeners, we want to know what you think. Is having a therapist in the office a good idea? Is it a bad idea? Let us know in the comments what you think.
And I do want to add one more thing. I started saying it, but I'm going to say it one more time, that I don't know if it'd be whether part of that program or if employers should really think about, as I said, having a psychologist or a psychotherapist available when there is tension within the system, when there's conflict, when there are shenanigans going on. Because, I mean, again, a person can spend 40, 60, 80 hours of their life per week dedicated to this job, and it has such an impact on them. And all it takes is one bad apple, one poisonous snake within the organization that can make everybody feel sick. So it's so important, I think, to be able to have someone who can come in, speak to the different people, get a sense of everything that's going on. I mean, it would have to be done in a way that, again, confidential information would not be disclosed. But the fact is that they would be able to go there and treat the system, not just the individuals, but you have to help the individuals. But seeing that the system is so, let's say, corrupt, toxic, broken, ineffective, however you want to call it. And today, I'm seeing more and more of that. Just a little side note here, that many of my clients and patients are saying that they are high achievers, they are high functioners, they want to do well. And they are being held back, or they're being sabotaged, or they're being excluded because of those great traits. So I would hope that companies would say, you know what, we have to realize that there are problems within the system. And I'm going to tell people again, kind of this, I've seen this happen many times, that that especially in the West, we have this need for justice. We have this need for a sense of safety and security, to believe that whatever system we are in, that there's something or someone above us that's going to oversee and make sure that things stay within the guardrails. And when you don't have that sense, it's terrifying. It's stressful. You don't want to go to work the next day. I've got people popping out of van, every morning. As soon as they see their building, they start having a stress reaction, because they know. And again, it doesn't even have to be the whole system. It can be one person. However, here's the thing. When you have layer upon layer of seniority, for example, I've seen this happen where the person above them, their manager, right? That person is just trying to keep things quiet here. That person is not trying to, they want to make sure that their superior doesn't hear any of this. So, but they're not adept at taking care of these problems. So if they can keep it quiet, that's all that matters to them. And so you're feeling this, wait a second, I know there's a solution. I know there's recourse. Yet the person who's supposed to be doing this, they're not helping. And so someone says, well, go to HR. Guess what? HR is not your friend. HR works for the company. They want to keep things quiet. So if you're going out there and you're a troublemaker, they're not going to resolve the problem. You are going to have the target on your back moving forward. And I've had so many clients, whether it's government, whether it's hospitals, universities, private businesses, banks, take your pick. I have seen this happen over and over and over. And I've watched people's mental, well-being deteriorate because they know there's a solution, but it's being denied them. So I know it's another rant here, but I'm just saying this out of empathy, because I've seen so many people have their lives ruined. And again, once again, especially if you're the breadwinner or you're one of the breadwinners, if your life is ruined, if you can't work, if you can't function, if your mental health is deteriorating, there's a lot of people who may depend on you and you're letting them down, which then, exacerbates the feelings of helplessness, distress, shame that the person's going through. So I'm just putting this out there again, just as I'm hoping if some people hear this, it resonates with them. And the question is, we always say at the end, what can you do about it? Well, I'm going to put it to you, Melanie. What can, if someone feels they're in a situation like this, what can they do about it?
Ugh, what can they do about it? So, I mean, the obvious would be accessing therapy outside of the employer. I think for all the reasons we've discussed here, but that's not always an option, right? I think the spirit of offering therapy in workplaces is that sometimes it is cost prohibitive for many people to be able to access regular therapy. So in situations like that, I think it's important to find somebody you can confide in, perhaps in the company, whether it's a colleague, probably not HR, not a manager, because of all the reasons that you stated. But I would say first confiding in a coworker and having safe and healthy outlets for that stress. We've spoken in the past about diet and exercise and getting good sleep and having good habits in general. That's certainly not going to solve the issue, but could certainly help with relieving and alleviating some of that stress.
Right. And then there's also, again, you have to be strategic and you have to recognize, because people, again, when they go into the system, especially when the companies say, we're like family, right? Well, okay, a dysfunctional family, because when things go wrong, where's the person there to help and say, hey, knock it off, or let's straighten this out and so on. So I say you have to have the right perspective, the right attitude. And it's, like the old expression, don't let the bastards get you down. And, and I use that, the power of spite. I say, don't let them break you, whether it's an employee, whether it's an ineffective manager, whether it's HR, or whether it's the insurance company. I say, I know it's hard. And I say, look, I'm saying this from the sidelines, but you need to play the long game. You
Mm-hmm.
need to look at it as in, right? I hate to say it's not, us versus them kind of thing, but the reality is that they don't care about you. They really don't. Whether it's the employer, colleague, insurance company, they really don't care at all. And that might sound disheartening, but that's just a reality. So if you have the right perspective, instead of saying, oh, they don't care about me, poor me, it's like, okay, well, yeah, they don't care about me. The only thing they have, the only obligation they have to me is if they're my boss, it's to pay me, right? And to make sure that that it's a relatively safe environment. But that's really it. So I need to advocate for myself. It doesn't have to be a lonely feeling. It can be an empowering feeling of, I need to make sure that I take care of myself. And as you say, diet, exercise, sleep, doing things to make you, to be in the best shape for the fight that may lie ahead, and to be prepared. And if you have gone to HR and there's no recourse, are you going to go above them? Can you do A, B, C, and D? Are you collecting all the data and evidence that you need? Are you, creating a paper trail? Making sure that you are advocating for yourself, because if therapy is offered through EAP, through in-house, through private insurance, whatever, okay, that's all good. But in the end, it's up to you truly to advocate for yourself. All these other services can help you, but you have to have the right perspective and the right strategy. So, it's too easy to just give in and say, oh, well, it's poor me, right? If you have, and by the way, again, we've worked with so many people, we've seen this where it's not poor me. Like they want to go back to work. They want to do what's right for themselves and so on. And all they do need is some help and support, which we do provide, psychological treatment, strategy, et cetera, coping and so on, right? But again, in the end, I'm just saying, I hope that people can realize that it's not a bad thing to say, fight for yourself,
Mm-hmm.
advocate for yourself, get the supports in place in any way that you can, and and be prepared to fight till the end. And if you can't, then you have to think about different careers. I've had so many clients over the last number of years, just change careers, whether it's get out of the company and work another one, or get out of, let's say, government and work privately, or, get out of the bank and work privately and so on, or just change your career completely, because there's no shame in saying, look, I've put 10, 20 years of my life into this, and I'm looking at burnout here. And I've seen, 20% of my colleagues go through the same thing. There's no shame in saying I've done my time.
Yeah.
I'm a little bit older now. I'm in a different life position right now. Maybe I have to shift my perspective and see what's best for me. How do I maintain a balanced life? And it's hard to lead a balanced life when you feel all the kind of pressures that we're discussing right now. So step back and reevaluate and see whether there's a better path forward.
Absolutely, yeah. And self-advocacy and essentially what you're saying there is finding things that you can control. Sometimes there's very little to nothing in our control in those situations, and leaving and pursuing something else is the only thing that we can really grab onto. And speaking from experience, I'm almost a decade removed from my previous career. That was a huge motivating factor, was I need to get the hell out of here.
Right. Okay. And again, having the right perspective on all of that doesn't mean you failed. Maybe you just have a different perspective and it's a healthier one. So anyway, on that note, until next time, keep your eyes on the road and your hands upon the wheel.